Hi there, welcome to another episode of the Context Podcast. We talk about everything related to the Claris platform. This week, your regular host, Martha Zink, is off. She's at the beach or, I don't know, riding a roller coaster, seeing a concert, something. Don't worry, she'll be back next week or with the next episode, but this week you got me. My name is Todd Geist, and I am the CTO of Proofgeist. And what we decided to do this week was have one of our favorite guests back on, and that's Chris Hippolyte, the founder of iSolutions. We've had Chris on a couple times in the past to talk about machine learning and AI and how it relates to FileMaker and the Claris platform. And given all the recent events with ChatGPT and other large language models, and Stable Diffusion and DALL-E and all that stuff, we thought it would be a good time to get Chris back on the show and talk a little bit more about what's been happening lately and where we think things are headed. So Chris and I go way back, so we've been having these kinds of conversations for, well, a long time. Let's just say that. And this was another good one. So I invite you to sit back and enjoy the show. And as always, please let us know what you think. We'd love to hear your feedback and if you have any ideas for new shows in the future. Okay, let's get started. All right. Well, here we are. I'm Todd Geist, and I'm here with Chris Hippolyte. Chris, say hi.
Hey, Todd. Great to be here with you, man. I'm excited about this conversation. Been looking forward to it.
Yeah. So September of 2021, we had you on to talk about AI and some of the stuff you had done in general, but also with FileMaker. Yep. And that was before ChatGPT was out. That was like a whole year, I guess, right?
Yeah. So November, kind of December 2022 is when ChatGPT got released. Right. And so kind of to frame it up, around that time frame, we're talking about limited access, not general availability yet to the GPT-3 API. No ChatGPT. It was just sort of a thing people were kind of, I think, thinking about in AI circles, but not like with the adoption that we've seen since then because of ChatGPT.
And so back then, you were messing around with APIs that let you call these models, but there was no like publicly available stuff, and certainly there wasn't the buzz that there is today in place. But we had you on back then, and since in the last 6 months, this stuff has just blown up, and I'm using AI powered coding tools every day, and it's becoming very obvious that this is not a fad.
Yeah,
and it's going to change the way we do things. I thought at first maybe overnight, but I think it's going to take a little time to roll through various industries and different businesses, and maybe, but definitely going to change. So we thought we should get you back on and talk about what you've been noticing and what you've been working with.
Yeah, can't wait.
In regards to all this new stuff.
I will warn you and tell you that the last vacation I went on, my wife told me, she pulled me aside and said, I need you to stop talking about AI to people. like you're freaking people out. So the fact that you're inviting me here, Todd, first of all, my good friend Todd, I don't know if people know how far back you and I go, but I was thinking about it this morning. I don't think I have another person in this universe that I've known longer and have worked with. Like you and I were in the trenches together back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s.
At least 25 years, maybe a few years longer. So yeah.
Oh boy! Now I just felt super old. I was just trying to reminisce. I wasn't trying to feel like an old man.
Sorry.
But okay.
I meant 5 years.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. There we go. For the kids. For the kids out there. Yeah.
Yeah. And then so we've been chatting and hanging out and doing work together for a couple decades.
One of the things we've always had in common was, you and I both, we've had conversations over the years of like things that people would probably laugh at us now, but like, before talking about JavaScript and emerging technologies there, I mean, you and I collaborate, like we were talking in the old Flash days, actually.
That's right.
Like
we were Flash stuff. Yeah.
Yeah. We were in at the Oscars together. Remember all that stuff? And then that turned to JavaScript. And then it became, we were like-minded when it came to API integrations, and now we're the same when it comes to AI. Yeah. And I think what the pattern there is that these were emerging technologies that were presented to us within the FileMaker space, and you kind of have a choice. You could either adopt or just ignore it, and be like, it'll be fine. But I think, and this is something that was in the last podcast, but I feel even stronger about it now, this isn't one of those things. Yeah. I really don't think that we're talking about a take it or leave it type technology. This is disruptive. It can be, it absolutely can be positive, both from a production and a coding standpoint, all the way down to a service offering standpoint. So that's kind of what I'm looking forward to talking, and amongst many other things as well too.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's interesting, just, all these emerging technologies that we've covered over the years, and we've always found a way to make FileMaker work within that, with those tools to expand what FileMaker is capable of. And it is fairly amazing that the other constant between us all this time has been FileMaker, Claris now, for over 25 years. That's pretty impressive in itself, quite frankly.
It is. And tip of the hat to Claris, and, the platform's still going strong. We know we just had a recent release of FileMaker, which I think is a big deal, both in just like, hey, check it out, we're talking about FileMaker, and also in some of the stuff we're able to do. But yeah, that is the through line. And I think that persists here with AI opportunities.
Yeah, I think we're probably going to talk a lot about disruption and say a lot of things that might be scary, that might sound like, oh my gosh, what I do every day is going to be so different. Maybe I won't be able to do it. And it may sound a little scary, but I know for myself, and I think you feel the same, that we see this as a positive, but something that you're going to have to pay attention to. Like you can't just ignore it. But
Agreed.
Again, 25 years, this thing's been going strong. We can bet it's going to be around for a little bit longer at least. And so we're not like saying throw out FileMaker, throw out Claris or whatever. But we do think you should be paying attention to AI, what it can do with FileMaker, but also just in the wider sort of ecosystem that we live in, which is tech broadly and business systems, information systems in general. Yeah,
absolutely. Yep. Oh, no doubt. I mean, in a private conversation you and I had earlier this week, we both said, publicly we can say we believe FileMaker's got a long tail, and there's this important role that it's going to play with its constituents now, and then other opportunities moving forward. And AI also, we both agree, is here to stay. It's a thing, and it's not going anywhere. And maybe we touch on regulations and maybe reasons people are anchoring to headlines and thinking, oh, that might be the reason I should ignore this. Don't do that. That is a fool's errand. It is not going away. It is not going to be banned. As a matter of fact, those aren't even the conversations that are truly happening anyways. But the point is, it's just like, if we bring it down, we're just talking about API integrations and extremely powerful capabilities we can bring into our platform and our applications through these API integrations. And that's even in the coding tools too, because technically that's really API calls in the environment.
I think you raise a good point that maybe we should just touch on briefly, which is it's not that there aren't a lot of issues around AI and the disruption that it's going to have. There are, and these will have to get worked out. Who knows? Maybe there will be some kind of regulation. There will be something to do with copyright laws may get tweaked. All of these things may happen, and it still will not stop this AI train from going on, because it is one of these. I've called it a John Henry moment. Like the old John Henry he was the last man who could outdig a steam shovel. But he died doing it, So
I hope there's a model called John Henry that pops up. Actually, that's too good. That's a perfect metaphor. I love that.
There is one, and I'm not sure if that's a perfect metaphor, but it's clear. And I think I can say for my own use of these tools, both as a coding tool, but also as a thinking tool, which we probably talk about a little bit. That there's just no question that I am more productive. And the stuff that I output is better than before. And you can't put that genie back in the bottle. You just can't.
No doubt. I firmly agree with that. And I'm talking about, I'm an old man FileMaker guy, and I just taught myself Python, Todd. Like, what in the heck is going on? And I'll admit, the edges were all sanded down for me, and I would just talk about outcomes I was looking for, and then I would get the information I need back. And now, the training wheels are off, and I'm having conversations with subject matter experts that know the code and understand the tech, and I'm holding my own. And honestly, I just did that in a couple of months. I don't think I don't think I would have had the capacity to do that even in, 2-3 times the time without this assistance. Yeah. So like just from a first person standpoint, it's real, and it made a huge difference for me. And allows me to take advantage of all the opportunities that AI is presenting as a result. So I think that's the bigger picture is, well, the faster you learn or the faster you can output. I mean, forget learn. How about just the production aspect of it? The challenge that I say to people who are worried about like their job going away, like I think this makes more sense with JavaScript, and you're a perfect person to throw this thought experiment at. What percentage of the JavaScript code that you were generating pre-Copilot, Todd, just to frame it up, was repetitive code?
Yeah, a lot.
Right?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, if the answer is over 50%, then you should be using a tool that helps you just get to the good stuff, that gets to the heavy lift, gets to the creative thinking and the use case specific coding that you're doing. So I don't know if it's like taking all you're a needle mover because you know this tech and you're trying to solve a problem. I don't think it takes any of that out of it at all. No. It just takes all the grunt, stuff out of it and gets you to the outcomes faster.
I'm trying to find this quote that GitHub Copilot just came out with their, so people who use GitHub Copilot, Copilot writes, according to their stats, 46% of the code. Right.
Oh, are you looking at that survey they did a couple months ago? Yeah. The best one on that survey, Todd, are you looking at it right now? Because they said it was like 78% feel more fulfilled. Yeah. I thought that was a really interesting thing to say, because that's kind of what we're talking about. Like those respondents absolutely were saying, yeah, it gets me there faster. I'm spending less time doing it. Cool. But you know what? I'm more satisfied in this experience.
No question.
Like I'm getting, and I think the way I would say that is, and I don't know if this is a thing we run into with FileMaker, but like I've always said, just for like how we can shepherd our customers to the end product is the closer we can get to that inception of, oh, you know what we should do is, to then having the thing, like the closer you can get that window, the better, the more satisfying the experience is. But unfortunately, we live in a world where, and it's okay, maybe it's okay for now, where our customers go, oh, it would be great if, and then they go through the process of finding a partner, and then they find a partner, and then we build out spec, and then we get into, even if it's an MVP, we're talking about a couple months later, and then they're like, oh yeah, cool. But like they don't have that emotional relationship with the problem and the thought bubble in the first place. And I think this tech is all it's doing is just constraining that and being more satisfying for everybody. So I think that's an interesting.
Yeah, I think it's true. Like I when I really started getting, it took a while for me to like really begin to rely on the coding. So inside of GitHub Copilot, I write a lot of JavaScript code. Still write a lot of FileMaker, but probably more JavaScript code these days. And so there's some muscle memory involved, and just like I've been doing it a long time. So it took a while for me to figure out how to use the AI properly, and we should talk more about that in a bit. But once I got where I felt like I could use it like a thinking tool, and I think this is the key thing, is I could code for way longer without a break, because what's really tiring about code is not code that works. It's code that doesn't work.
Errors. Errors.
And so where do errors come from? Errors come from, sometimes it's because you don't know what you're doing and you're writing something wrong. But a lot of times errors come from just like typos, syntax, mistakes. So simple examples that might make sense over audio would be like if you wanted to process a list of items and do run some code over it and loop that same piece of code over and over again. The minute you get inside of that loop, it figures out that that's what you're doing, and it's just suggesting the lines, based on the first one, like the first template you wrote, it'll just suggest it after that. And so you don't have to,
and that's the premise of Copilot.
It may even help to sketch that idea out briefly in a comment, and then you just start typing the functions or the lines of code, and it goes, oh, I know what you're doing. And it just starts to fill in the lines. So you just end up going tab, enter, tab to accept the prompt that this is what you want this. Yeah, enter. New line. Do you want this? Yeah, enter. And it just does it. And so you don't spend time writing that repetitive stuff. You're on to the thing that actually takes some thought, which is now the architecture of the program itself.
How many Saturdays, Todd, and I know you're a Saturday guy, how many Saturdays have you sat down, you walk the dogs, you come back and you're like, ooh, you know what would be amazing? I got to try this idea. Like, this is the next big thing. And you sit down at your desk and you're like, oh, yeah. And then all of a sudden, error, boom, error. And then finally it's like 1 o'clock in the afternoon. You're like, forget this. Then all of a sudden it's gone. Like the moment is gone. And those are the kind of things that I think you can capture. And it's interesting. Now, in fairness, we're talking about JavaScript and Python and stuff that you can actually manage inside, like, VS Code or something like that. But, people that are listening have the same thing in common with us. We're FileMaker developers as well too. And it's not the same thing. Okay. Like, and I mean this in a positive way. I think I want to reveal something very unique about FileMaker and why these foundation models are really good examples, are really good ways for people to leverage it. I'll get to it because I know it's a controversial statement, but it's not code. I hope that's not controversial. We are not coding in FileMaker. We are clicking and, doing stuff and typing. But the interesting thing about FileMaker is that no other low-code platform has 30 years worth of discussion about it on the internet. So really, when people are using ChatGPT, for example, which if you're not using anything, you should be using ChatGPT. But if you're a business and you want to integrate foundation models, don't use ChatGPT. First of all, it's not secure. Secondly, it's not the right paradigm. You should be using APIs and integrating it. We can talk about that later. But for us FileMaker folks, if I want to figure out how to write a calculation or a custom function, I can easily use ChatGPT, right? So the first thing is, why should that actually work? Well, it actually went through all the forums and all the, the Claris forums and all the other third-party forums, and maybe somebody has questions on Stack Overflow or something like that, and it grabbed all that information. It didn't memorize it. And I think this is important because I think there's a floating misconception out there about what's actually happening. It's not like an index retrieval at all. It's not saying, I need to figure out this custom function, go find a repository that was consumed on the web and find where somebody wrote that. It's actually taking everything that's out there and teaching itself how to do this. I think people really need to understand the gravity of what's happening. Like, it taught itself how to do it. Now, did it teach it how to do it perfectly? Not all the time. And in the case of FileMaker, we only have ourselves to blame because, unfortunately, it looked at if you look at just the forum, for example, it's mostly people putting a script on there going, here's my script that doesn't work. Can somebody tell me what's wrong with it? And then if it's followed by a script that does work, well, it consumed both of those. Right? So the point is, it doesn't necessarily know, because FileMaker is not coding based and you can't process it and run it to see if you actually got it correctly. The language model is basically just saying, well, I think this is how a FileMaker script works. Give this a shot, but it doesn't have any way to actually like publish it or run it like it could, like in a Python like execution environment or in a JavaScript environment or something like that. So what that means is, and I think the overall discussion, has been, I've tried ChatGPT and it's terrible. It's not as good at FileMaker as I am. But I would say I spent like a year looking at GPT from a learning tools perspective. And I don't disagree that it's not perfect. It's not. But boy, if you've ever done like, take a really complex, like huge, massive let function, like the kind that you write, and literally copy and paste it and put it in there and just go, what is going on with this? Oh my God. Like the refactoring of code, what's a more efficient way to do this script? What is this function? What is this calculation that some other developer on my team wrote or whatever? Creating comments for your code, like that stuff is pretty darn close to flawless, right? But the zero shot, Todd, the make me a code that does this, that's not how you use the tool, right? It's supposed to be like an iterative process where you push and pull and then eventually you move it in the right direction and tell you what you want. And then it gives you this chef's kiss perfect output. But the zero shot where you're just like, give me the thing and you expect it to be perfect, that's not how you use the tool. But you can turn it around and go, what is this? And do that in a zero shot fashion. And it's actually really great. So I hope somewhere in there that, I don't know if I articulated that properly.
I think that's a common misconception that people have right away, is that it's just you're going to say to it, hey, write me a script that goes through all the data in my invoices table and makes a PDF with a summary report on it. It's not going to do that. Like that's
No.
not where we're at. But it can help you deal with some of the more complex issues with that, especially functions. Functions are great because they're pure text. Again, it's the model for these tools is text, and it's just text, and it understands it understands in the way that these language models do. It understands FileMaker's calculation engine pretty good. Pretty well.
And I think the other reason, to your point, why the calculation functions are better and why it can look at a calculation function you give it and explain what's happening or tell you what's wrong with it is because there's logic in those functions. Like they're not super proprietary. I mean, the function names, it can go figure out there's only so many functions and it has all that access. It literally has like the Claris help system built into it, right? So it knows. But it knows the logic of the text of a function. Like we have more logic, so to speak, in a calculation function or a custom function than we do in a script. A script is just a series of routines. It's not a real script, like a JavaScript script. It's just a
and it might be doing
series of
things
routines.
like navigation and other.
Well, right. So how's it going to know?
PDF
like,
mode. So yeah. I mean, I think the, you definitely get in terms of using these AI tools to write code. You get a bigger bounce if you're writing Python or JavaScript or one of those.
Definitely.
But you can still use it. You can still use it to do FileMaker stuff. And I think the interesting thing I want to go back a little bit to what you talked about in terms of teaching model, because I know you spent a large part of your career teaching people FileMaker, and I think it's interesting. Like my take on teaching is that, or at least in my experiments, like I've had to write code. Like I don't write a lot of Bash, but I needed to write a Bash script. So I was able to give ChatGPT enough prompting that it gave me a Bash script. But I also knew how to run a Bash script, and I could test a Bash script, and I could kind of read code a little bit. So I'm good enough at that stuff that but I'm not familiar. It's like I can read Latin, but I can't really write it. It's kind of thing. It's sort of that same thing. If you can like read a language, you can actually you actually have enough skills to probably get these models to spit out functioning code for you. But if you're learning from scratch, what's your take on learning from scratch? Because I think it's because it's wrong enough of the time that if you don't know anything, I think you might be a little bit of a disadvantage.
Yeah, you said something interesting to me the other day about the eating from the bottom up. Remember that comment? And I think this is what you were sort of triangulating on. You were referring to the fact that like who's most likely to be affected by automated coding, like in a FileMaker context, and that would definitely be I don't know whether the thing it gave me back is right or not. It brand new to the platform. Now, and I think what that does is it tells you how you make the best use of it. So to your point, and I agree, and I'll layer on top of it, those at the top of the pyramid know what questions to ask and know how to have a conversation with it. So I think to really simplify it, the way to really use the tool is to see it as somebody sitting next to you who you're having a conversation with, not a tool that is answering, like the magic 8-ball oracle that you shake and go, whatever, and then the answer pops out. Like literally, if you were just like, you had that's why they call it Copilot. Yeah. Hey, what do I do with this? And then they give you an answer and you go, well, yeah, but what about blah, blah, blah. If I look at my ChatGPT and the hundreds of conversations, not a single one of them was one prompt and then I got a response back. These are conversations, right? And so that way I think that the people who are more advanced can get unstuck. They can figure out what somebody else was doing. They can write custom functions very easily and have a really positive and efficient experience that way. But the new learners, so Todd, the new learners for me, it was mostly where they were looking at something and they were trying to figure out what it was.
Oh, I see.
The explain as a matter of fact.
Yeah.
So I created this thing called the Claris Learning Companion. Like, I don't know. I actually was working on it when I did the pod with you guys last time, but I was just doing it internally because it started off as a zero shot, like build me a FileMaker script. And then it would give me a FileMaker script. And I was like, oh my God. Like it knows FileMaker. But then I started looking at it. I was like, oh yeah, that's not very good, or this isn't very good, or whatever. And then I tweaked it a little bit. And then I started doing, give me 3 FileMaker calculation functions or formulas that will give me the same outcome. And then I, using expertise in the smell test, I could, oh yeah, that actually is pretty good over here. And then I went into the explain or refactor. And so when I'm doing like, new learner training, not the recorded stuff, but actually like classroom or, mentoring stuff, that stuff is perfect because like the whole point is at some point you got to be able to look at something and know what's going on and be able to like read FileMaker. And that is a excellent tool, when it comes to that.
I mean, I use it all the time. And it's funny. I hadn't thought about it as something to help you learn, but I used it.
My tip is try 3, do that. That's for everybody listening who still believes that it's useful. Do the give me 3 of anything. And I think that's a really cool eye opener because essentially you're just telling it, give me your 3, like your highest confidence completion, your second highest, and your third highest. And it could be that the third highest one is actually the correct one. And the second one is refactor script. Paste a script into it and have it refactored and make it more condensed. I think you'll be pretty blown away by that. And then finally, explain what this is. Yeah. Like you could use if someone super smart like you who knows how to build tools and stuff, you could easily leverage a language model to go automatically comment a script in a FileMaker file like in an instant and do comments for calculations because it knows with enough level to be able to do comments, how to actually write those things. So if you could actually insert that into the FMXML, that'd be pretty cool.
We're actually looking at that. I think some others are. I think the challenge is just the XML clipboard. It's getting in and out of the clipboard is the challenge.
Context.
And we've actually got some experiments that will work, but how do you deploy that to people is the issue. I mean, we'll probably end up having to do something with like a base elements plug-in in a FileMaker file to actually do that. That's probably the easiest way to get it for everybody who's using FileMaker to get it. But we've done some experiments with that, and it seems like there's a there.
Well, the other part though is, and this probably gets into other ways that you can leverage language models, is how you can insert truth into the language model. Okay. So first of all, I think there's a misconception that if you're having these conversations and you like correct it in one of your conversations in ChatGPT, that now you've somehow changed the overall corpus of data. That is not true. All you've done is changed it in that context. Right. Here we are in the context podcast. Yeah. We're going to really talk about context.
Every chat has a context, in that short-term memory.
Every chat, it's a new session and it has its own memory. The memory is finite though. And this is one of the biggest, like when we have this conversation in a year, Todd, we won't talk about context window at all. But right now, context window is a big deal because the way the transformer technology works and the training actually works, it essentially says it only has a memory of this many. It's not words, they call them tokens, but for today's conversation, let's just use words. So like ChatGPT, the basis, non-ChatGPT plus, not the GPT-4 model, has like a 4,000 token window. Like 3,000 words, 2,500 words or something like that. So that means you could still have a conversation that's like 5,000 words, but the window of memory is sliding like almost like a parallax effect, if you can visualize that if you're listening. And all the stuff that was before, it doesn't know. It's like, what are you talking about? I've never heard that. And you're like, what do you mean? It's right here. Well, so that's why when GPT-4 comes out and it's got an 8K context window, you can have a much more meaningful outcome with it. And then they have a 32K, which is not generally available, but that's only through API. When that comes out, oh my God. And then, Anthropic, as of the recording of this, it was just last week, which is like, a year in AI development, but they just announced a 100K context window. And now there's all these like Mosaic has a 86K or whatever. Like, so that's what people are talking about when they say the big window. Yeah. And that is a big deal because if you want to have it, like, if you just want to give it like FMXML, that's too much for the 8K window right there. You can't even process that, right? So that's why this is a really important thing to consider when you're trying to get the language model to do something.
Yeah, and we should point out, because you just brought it up, that OpenAI and the ChatGPT or the OpenAI APIs are only one model. There's lots available. Some that are open source, and actually the open source models are getting quite good.
I would say responsibly. So 2 years ago, all I was talking about was OpenAI, and honestly, because that's really all anybody had public access to through an API, was the OpenAI GPT-3 model, which was followed by another 3.5. But then after that, people hear more in like the search models, like they hear about Bard and like the actual consumer interface, the ChatGPT versus Bard and all that kind of stuff. But the models that behind it are exactly to your point. And I think that's an excellent point you just brought up. So Google has its own models. Meta has its own models. Meta then released one to the wild, right? Which was a huge, I think that's probably the biggest news in 2023 was when Meta released Llama. It sounds like a zoo, like something escaped from a zoo, but they released a model and they were just saying, here's the model because we think open source is a thing. And that blew people away because the expectation because why is that a big deal? Well, the compute power that's necessary for OpenAI to go from GPT 3.5 to GPT-4, it was like $40 million in compute, right? So it's like, okay, we're not going to just roll out a version in an agile, like in a sprint, like this actually costs real money. So the fact that you could then, they were training models. So there's an interesting conversation about the open source where they can train, like Mosaic ML just, they trained for less than $200,000, all right? And they came up with a context window of 84K for $200,000, and then the Llama, the big news with Llama was like people were taking the trained model, they don't have to train it, and now they're running it on like A100s and Raspberry Pi. Yeah. Are you kidding me? Yeah. Like, so then what people were saying was like, whoa, we thought that was going to take like 2 years to get from 40 million. Like literally there was like a graph that was going around, Twitter. Like the expectation from all the experts was 2025, we can actually get down under $100, right? For running these things. And then they just did it like in March. And so everyone was freaking out. And there was a little bit of a safety zone there because Meta released Llama on purpose without commercial license. I think that's important to note. And then somebody leaked the weights and balances, which is essentially like the cipher to make sense of it. And then all of a sudden it went crazy. So literally everything you're seeing, the Mosaic I just mentioned, all those, they're all like rooted in these open source models. So the other reason that's super important is because anyone who's a business decision maker who's finding comfort in the fact that they think that language models are going to get banned or something, or they're going to like stop, you're not going to let you use them for like the summer or whatever, that's craziness, because first of all, no one is suggesting any of that. But more importantly, those regulations are going to start at the OpenAIs and the Microsoft partnership and the Azures and the Google and whatever. The enforcing those down inside your local stack behind your firewall is an open source product. To me, Todd, how would that even happen? I don't even understand how that would happen. So the industry's moving towards language models. Every AI project we did last year was on OpenAI, and this year, one OpenAI and the rest are all open source. And one of the ones from last year we have to now redo locally because, and I think this is important, the customer is saying, well, isn't some of my data going out? During the API call, it's going out. Like in ChatGPT, by the way, your data not only goes out, but it gets stored in ChatGPT. So don't use ChatGPT for business. And by the way, that's why when you hear like last week, Apple
banned it.
They banned it, but just to be clear, they banned using ChatGPT, which means don't put our product, all the stuff that we're going to drop in 2 weeks, because they're storing it. And no one should be surprised because those conversations on the left-hand side, those are actually stored on their server somewhere. So, however, if you're doing API calls, and Sam Altman just said this in front of Congress, he's like, when you use the API, we don't store your information. We do not use it to train. Yeah. So those are two really important comments when it comes to the business decision makers deciding whether or not they should be worried about data privacy or whatever. But the next level of it, if you're still worried about data privacy, is go grab an open source model, put it in your stack behind your firewall, and then do all your communications locally like you're doing with everything else. And, you got everything you need. And most of what people are doing with language models, you don't need GPT-4 for anyways. So it's worth at least trying some of these open source models. I hope that's the biggest takeaway of the day for people that are really considering doing this in a business.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's we should know that the concept of what the models can do and what kind of impacts they can have. I mean, it's just clear that it's true. The specific forms that those models are, whether it's OpenAI or Llama or Mosaic ML or whatever, are pretty fluid right now in terms of what is like the latest, greatest thing that's coming out. Now, there's an event next week, which we hope will have this
Oh, yeah.
podcast out either just before or right after this event at our favorite company. Apple's got their WWDC, and there's been a lot of speculation and rumor around what Apple may do in this AI space, because they can't just leave it. Like, it's pretty clear. No. And they've built a whole brand around privacy. So it's going to be pretty interesting to see what they do in the future. And there's, some of us are hoping we're going to see some of that next week, although we know they're going to drop something about their VR headset.
Yeah, we'll just put the VR AR stuff on the shelf. That's outside the scope of that's outside the context window of this context podcast.
That's right. But we think that they may be up to something. Do you have any thoughts on what that might be?
Yeah, so let's spell it out as to why Claris people should care about this, for starters, right? So, first of all, Claris is an Apple subsidiary. Okay, we know that. Everybody knows that. Well, what does that mean for potentially integrating AI into a Claris platform, for example, right? Well, that means that until Apple says it's okay, Claris can't go do that, right? So legally, they're saying, and it has to do with a lot of the fact that there's like yet to be settled attribution law, copyright stuff is huge. And so Apple essentially says, look, until this is settled, none of our code that we use we can't use Copilot. We can't use any of these tools to generate Apple products.
Yeah.
Okay.
Can you imagine the lawsuit target that would be?
Oh, because they're the biggest target in the world.
They can't do it. So they basically said no.
And they can't do it. So then you go, well, good luck with that. I mean, because it almost would be like saying you're the biggest manufacturer of goods in the world and you're not going to China or something, right? Like you're just, we're going to keep it here and pay 8 times the cost to do it. Like, how long is that going to work, right? So obviously they're way smarter people than you and I. So they know they would need to leverage this, and so they would need to create their own model. Well, what's the problem with that? Well, if we dissect that, the problem is these corpus of data, corpi of data,
Corpuses.
Todd? Corpuses. Okay, cool. I like that.
I don't know what it is. It's one of those.
So the big things of data, those have, well, first of all, before people get too freaked out, if you're worried, hey, UK and the EU, I'm talking to you. If you're worried that your PII is in these language models, go Google yourself once. By the way, do you really, all it did is get the stuff from the internet. It did not expose any additional information. It's not like taking credit card databases or whatever. It's literally whatever's on the internet as of 2021 is available in these language models. So settle down. Google it yourself. You're going to see the creepiest thing you've ever seen. You don't even have to pay $5 for a background check. So that's the first thing. But still, Apple can't do that because of the risk that you just outlined. So then the question is, as I'm thinking about this, is what data do they have? And you just said something super interesting. They are the world leader in data privacy at the same time. So basically what they've said is, remember, I think we were both at the Macworld where they did the billboards all over San Francisco about Google, if you don't care about your personal data, go with Google, or whatever. It was a really hard line that they played on data privacy, and they've kept that ever since. And they've really built a product and a trust with their customers around it. So how do they then pivot and go, oh yeah, forget that. we need to use your data. So the way I think about this is the following, and then I'm going to throw something out there that blows up my whole theory. But I was talking about something on the last pod. What I was calling a self model, Todd. Yeah. I don't know how else to explain it, but it means right now, Wells Fargo has a model of you. Netflix has a model. Google has 50. There's a million models of Todd Geist out there, and you don't have any control over any of them. So, by the way, if you're worried about Googling and you're seeing your private information, wait till you see what is in everybody's models, to the tune of tens of thousands of these. I think a perfectly positioned player in the market could turn that whole thing around and go, how about this? Well, so look what they did with Safari when they said they're going to manage cookies. They hit Facebook in the knees, right? Because you couldn't do all this ad tracking. So they made a big impact there. Someone like Apple could technically put the walls up around PII completely and go, hey, Todd, here's your model. And instead of everybody just grabbing your stuff and you having to opt out like we do with websites and the California one and the GDPR or whatever, how about we give you all your data, Todd? And then you can allow people to opt in. You can go, hey, Netflix wants your data because they want to see what kind of stuff you're interested in. Okay, cool. Yeah, Netflix, you're cool to have it. Amazon wants to know, your likes and dislikes. Like, then we turn it around and you start opting in. Well, a perfectly positioned player in the market to do that would be somebody who already operates in a walled garden, who has an unbelievable amount of personal information about us, like our messages, our emails, our Siri transcripts, where we go, how we're walking around, our health information. Like, think of the data that Apple has on each one of us and how that could play an interesting role. Forget out into the language model world. Imagine if like Siri was actually good. And by the way, I've never been more frustrated with Siri than when ChatGPT became part of my life. Now I literally, I yell at Siri all the time and my Roomba. I'm like, I have such high expectations for AI. How dare you let me down, Siri and Roomba? But the Siri thing is really interesting because it could be you know what I want. Just Siri, come on, man. You know everything about me. And you know what I'm doing this weekend. And you know who I'm doing it with. And you know who I was just talking to about this. Can you just make all that work together and just like go figure out where we're going for dinner? Let the Joneses know down the street. Tell my babysitter what's up. And then, by the way, go make reservations over there. Oh, if we can't get into that place, maybe we cook at home. Go find our favorite dish over there and go fill an Instacart thing for us or whatever. Like that is totally possible from a personal assistant standpoint. And that's what Siri set out to do. And they never accomplished.
They weren't able to
honestly.
because they missed the large language, or they didn't have the large language models that can do the conversational piece very well. But I think you may have jumped over one part, which I think is really key here, that people should get, is that when you say Apple has your data, they have it, but they have it on your device. Right?
Yes.
So like, you remember like that famous terrorist case from a number of years back when that shooting happened out here in the Inland
out
Empire,
here in California.
They literally couldn't get the data off the iPhone.
They defied the federal government
because they don't.
And
have
that was a
it.
great
It's
play.
encrypted on the phone.
Well, so then one would think, okay, there was a company, I don't know how to pronounce this, Todd. I'm looking it up. People on YouTube can see my eyes moving off screen, but it's called XNOR.ai, Zoner, whatever. It's a process for making machine learning algorithms highly efficient, so efficient they could even run on the lowest tier hardware like a mobile device or on the edge.
Yeah.
Right? So why am I bringing that up? And why am I bringing up another company that is called Vilnix, who developed a self-learning AI platform to understand personal content, on-device personal content? Why am I bringing those two up? Those companies were both acquired by Apple in 2020, Todd. So there's two ways to figure out what Apple's doing. Look at the patent for hardware because they have to file this patent, and then go look at their acquisitions for software. So how do we piece all that together?
You got to also throw in the fact that if you go download one of these AI models, at least it was when I initially started doing this, I assume it's pretty much the same, but like they require an M1. Like you need an M1 to run a lot of these things. Some of the bigger ones, like Stable Diffusion and stuff like that.
Yeah, and to validate that, even on the open source thing, you hear two things when a new open source model comes out. It goes, what's its capabilities, and then what compute is required to actually run it locally.
And a lot of them are M1s because the M1s are particularly good at this kind at this kind of computation. So Apple's got the hardware. They have they've got everything they need to build it on the edge.
They have their own silicon, which has been, by the way, been driving very advanced machine learning in non-language model implementations for a long time.
For example,
the camera's incredible. I mean, just go open the Measure app on your phone or something like that. Like that's pretty crazy what's happening there, right? From just an ML standpoint. So they've got that, and then they've got these other technologies. They've got this data that lives on the device. They could possibly model it. They have they've literally not done anything to Siri in so long that you have to be like, they know Siri sucks. Like, why are you not doing like incremental updates of this? So I think there's something there. And then we look at these acquisitions, and I think we're cobbling together a reasonable theory. But then something completely threw me off on this. They announced the WWDC, and you know how they do their wacky little like teases in the name? This year it's called Swiftly Developing. Oh, yeah. Come on. So obviously you're going to do like a text to code within Swift. And
Xcode will have
I would imagine
will have some kind of Copilot probably.
Xcode has to have a Copilot, and I don't know. That's going to happen. That's obviously going to happen. And the reason it's going to happen is because sitting in a lot of like business meetings with Apple salespeople, hearing them, I'm not saying any names, but hearing them refer to like when the App Store came out, every Apple salesperson who was going out into the field and talking to a school district or a big enterprise or something like that, they don't make software. I mean, they make Claris, but let's be honest, like most people at Apple don't even know that Claris exists. But their customers would say, "Hey, we have these problems we need to solve with your hardware. You just sold us 40,000. We're Pfizer, and you just sold us 40,000 iPads. Well, great, but we have this problem we want to solve." And so what the Apple people have been doing for like 10 years plus is going, go build an app for it. Go use Xcode or Swift and build this app out. And then what I've heard these people say over and over again is they're lamenting. They're like, no one can do that. Like, it's really, really hard to do. So if they can solve for the fact that they make Xcode easier and, the whole Swift environment easier to develop in, that solves a huge enterprise level problem for them. I don't know if that's great news for Claris now that I'm hearing myself say it out loud, but I think that I would be absolutely shocked if they don't have a Copilot, not named Copilot, definitely not named Copilot, but something that helps you swiftly develop. But then my question would be, how'd you do that? Because where's their corpus of
their data?
Xcode, right? Yeah. You know what I mean? Like, so, because like they don't have like,
what they're going to do is going to
we don't know.
What they're going to do is going to have to be different because of the rules and the branding that they've set up around privacy. It's going to have to take a different approach.
Which is fascinating.
Which is great. In my opinion, Apple's coming out and blocking a lot of the ad business that was around, prior to 2021 was so good for the rest of the world in terms of,
for them,
reasons, and so they're gonna bend this whole market in another direction, and it's going to be in the privacy direction, and that's good news. I think.
I love it. I love it. I hope this whole idea of I control who has access to me and my model and my likes, I hope that becomes a reality. Yeah. I hope Apple's the one that does it. And just to say something kind of on the fringes of what we've been talking about here, language models are one thing. Transformer models that use all this, the human language to learn about us and understand how we reason and our structure of communication is interesting. But if you dig even deeper, dialogue, like the actual like pragmatics of like you and I talking to each other and you say something and I respond and that sort of transactional thing that's happening is a whole nother type of training, by the way. Like those are actually referred to as dialogue models. And the reason I'm mentioning that is for like 2 years from today when we have the part 3 conversation when dialogue models are a thing, I want to sound smart, but also because then players like Apple, I have enough dialogue data. I mean, especially me, I never shut up, but I have enough dialogue data on my device for them to create a mini dialogue model on the edge for me.
Yeah.
And by the way, regardless of how people feel about Elon Musk, I'm not going to take a position on it. But he bought Twitter. Yeah, I mean, he bought Twitter, whatever he's saying with, free speech and all that kind of stuff. But he also bought it because it is, and at the same time, right before they bought it, they cut off anybody's access to use Twitter data as training data. And dialogue models are the next big thing. And so Elon is basically sitting on like the world's greatest dialogue treasure trove of data. Yeah. And he also just developed X.AI is what he announced. And so I'm predicting. Yeah, isn't it?
So we should bend this thing back around to, we're talking a lot about just sort of how to think about AI and how we think about it and where we think some of the moves in the industry are coming. But let's see if we can bend it back towards our day jobs, if you will, and not so much necessarily rooting it in FileMaker, but just sort of how does a business, although I think we should, what should businesses be thinking about in terms of
absolutely,
and maybe specifically what's interesting about FileMaker and what we can do with FileMaker in these models.
Thanks. I do a lot of like one-to-many presentations to business decision makers about just AI, and mostly I'm talking about, and the only people who even respond to anything I put on LinkedIn are probably outside the FileMaker space anyways, just like business people. And mostly I'm just trying to say like, yeah, this is what it is. This is what it isn't. And this is what you should worry about. This is what you shouldn't worry about. That's kind of where I'm at with these conversations. But through all that, it's very clear to me how you use these models and where their superpowers really are for business, right? Not for coders, not for entertainment, not for whatever. And then before we dive into that perspective, why is FileMaker a good use case for this? Well, let me address that because I'm kind of excited for this. First of all, total easy native back and forth API integrations. Huge deal.
That's right.
Because what we're talking about, integrating a language model subtly or like overwhelmingly into your FileMaker application means you're doing API integrations, right? In and out. We have native JavaScript parsing. We have, how would you describe it? I know you have a position on native FileMaker.
Yeah.
The API is within the paradigm of native FileMaker, right? So that's all you need.
Yeah.
From a tech standpoint. Now, let me then say something that's kind of exciting from a machine learning modeling standpoint. Like I'm not talking about like language models, but like real ML stuff. So, great anecdote. I had this idea, whatever, blah, 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 blah. I was going to come up with this project risk rating for our internal iTools system. And I was so excited. I was so proud of myself. Oh my God, it's a rating. And then like every project can have a risk. And then I don't need to have the project manager tell me when, stuff's starting to smoke. I'll just, I'll know, and I'll just be able to address it that way. So I was so excited, and I wrote up a whole presentation. I did a presentation to all the project managers. And then I talked to this colleague of mine who he's a PhD data scientist who I created my fantasy football thing where we saw each other at React. He and I created that model together and did a paper together in 2013. And so I go to him for the tech, and I go, hey, man, the Dr. Shuckers, I'll give him a call out here. Hey, Dr. Shuckers, great idea, man. This is what we're going to do. I'm going to do this, that, and the other, and it's going to spit out this rating, and then it's just going to alert me when a rating gets above a certain threshold and blah, 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 blah. And he goes, oh, brilliant idea. Good idea. How's your data? Like, what does your data look like, and what's your data capture mechanism look like? And I was like, shoot. I don't have any, sorry about that. I don't have it. The data is not in the right format. My data capture mechanism is not, giving me enough, like I might have blank fields or redundant data, or I'm not capturing this one variable to make this model actual work. So who's in big trouble there? Well, it's the companies that are subscribing to some SaaS system that everybody, you can't manipulate it. You can't do anything with it. But us FileMaker folks, we go in there and we tweak that thing within minutes. Like literally the thing can still be hosted up on the server, and we go, oh, you want a field for that? Boom, here you go. You want to be able to capture this within the workflow? Boom, there you go. So API integration and the agility when it comes to the data capture and pre-processing mechanisms that are necessary to really make AI work and ML work are there.
Yeah.
They're native within native FileMaker.
Yeah.
So that's our platform. So then what's the other thing that's necessary? I'm going to make a grand statement. I'm going to tell you that when we're on our business applications, I'm thinking through this to make sure I'm not lying. I think every one of them, at least every one of them in 2023, every AI integration and implementation, whether integrated with FileMaker or not, none of them have been just directly connecting to the language model where you ask it and it gives you something back. So when I think about lack of truthfulness and hallucination and like harmful content, I don't even care because that's not what I'm using the language models for. In all of those cases, we're doing some form of taking the organization's proprietary data and putting it in between the user and the language model itself, thus minimizing the role of the language model completely. It's now acting as a reasoning engine and a logic engine, and it's learning how to speak to humans. But the data, the truth, is coming from the organization's data.
That's right.
Right? So to me, that, and guess what? Every one of us in the FileMaker space, our customers have data. I know it sounds kind of silly, but that's a big deal. And they have access to their data and the agility to make something happen with it. And they have this mindset, because they're in FileMaker in the first place, they have this mindset that like, yeah, I can customize things. And that's important. And so all those things come together, Todd, and I think in a really exciting way that, to me, the profile for what businesses can benefit from or from foundation model integrations are everyone who has FileMaker already. SMB all the way up to enterprise. I would dare say that the SMBs have a bigger advantage than enterprise because they have more agility.
They do. And it's probably easier to get these projects through because the enterprises either have bands or committees that are figuring out what to do about all this stuff. And there's it's going to take a while for some of those to catch up. I think one of the things that really shifted my thinking about this was understanding that one way to look at what the language models do, whether it's the big ones like OpenAI or the open source ones, is they handle sort of the conversational aspect of it, or the vagary of just human communication, and they can turn that into discrete commands or discrete queries, which can then be run against whatever data source you want, or do whatever you want. So like I've been looking at the ChatGPT plugins. Because I think they're just an interesting model of how these types of integrations can be thought of.
By the way, we just deployed an unverified ChatGPT plugin yesterday, and so
tell us what it does.
So I'm super,
can you tell us what it does?
Well, yeah. I mean, okay. I had to pick something that I don't want to go. This is a whole new frontier, and there could be roadblocks and weird stuff that happens. The documentation is not good. The experience is not good. There's only 70 plugins in there right now. Somehow I got whitelisted to be able to submit.
Yeah, so can I.
So I didn't want to take my client stuff because I don't know how to set expectations. So Todd, I took my
fantasy football
thing. Yeah. Of course, because I own the data, and it's actually a perfect use case because any app, again, the same thing I just said about business, anything you're doing where you're like, and by the way, I have a lot of conversations with people who have like the next big AI idea, and they're like, hey man, let's go have a beer and talk about this new $1 billion idea. And all it is some like thing you can just do with ChatGPT for free, right? So I don't think plugins are useful if they do that. So like what my plugin does is it goes and checks with this proprietary data set that I'm creating through this series of machine learning models that you can't get anywhere. Yeah. So it's not like someone can just go into ChatGPT and get these answers. They have to go, first of all, they go in and they check with my data source first. So to your point, and this is why I wanted to bring it up in that context, what Todd just said was, so I go into the language model and I go, how much is Aaron Rodgers going to suck this year and how bad are the Jets? And then it goes, and so what the language model does is it has this intelligence where it goes, he's asking about a player named Aaron something or another, and he's asking about a team called JET, whatever that spells, who knows. And then he's asking about how bad are they going to suck? So that must mean like, what are their performance predictions? And so what it does, to Todd's point, is it generates a JSON block that literally says action, query, name, player equals name. So that's actually pretty amazing what's happening. It's dynamically reading through it and going and providing giving some logic. And then what all that happens is it goes and it hands that as an endpoint over to my system, which responds with the data in JSON. And then it goes and polishes it up and comes up with like a whole cool paragraph of like neat English language. So that's literally how the whole ChatGPT plugin paradigm works. But also to your point, Todd, and I'll let you elaborate, really that's probably the most fascinating way to use these models is to have it output text that you can then use to integrate, or formats that you can use to integrate.
So like I think about like we're going to do a blog post on this because it still is pretty cool, but we have this internal system called Radar that captures all of the data about all of our customers that come in, various different apps, whether it's our shopping cart or our sales app. We use an app called Pipeline for that. QuickBooks, for accounting, Harvest for time tracking. We have all these different things. All that stuff gets pulled into a FileMaker app, which we can then query by email address. And so we built inside of our email
as
app,
a key, like basically
inside of our email,
because that's all those systems have the email.
It can show you everything that we have on any email that comes in, right? So that's cool and all, but it's sort of like last year's technology, right? It's still really awesome and we love it. And it's not going away, but
it's impressive.
If you think about what we're talking about doing is getting rid of the UI part of that, like all of the UI that we had to build to do that integration, and it becomes something where you're just asking questions and telling it to perform actions. So I could say, what do we know about this email address? And it figures out, oh, you're asking about a person. There's their email address. I know how to query your internal database with an email address, and I know what the results look like when it comes back. So I can create a nice, formatted block of text.
It's perfect. Right? And people might be going, well, then who cares if I could just do a SQL query? Well, the point is, what Todd's illustrating is that big chunk of text that comes back still goes to the language model, not to the user. And then the language model goes, oh yeah, this is just text. Let me make this make sense, and I'll infuse some logic and some good writing, and I'll wordsmith this to you, and maybe go find some other data that I can embellish it with that might be useful, and maybe a level of reasoning and complex processing, and then I give it back to the user.
That's right. Like we could say, we could say something like, I could say, hey, we have a whole bunch of people have bought stuff from us, and they have an iSolutions email. Who spent the most money out of all the?
Who did that? No, I'm just kidding. Right.
Who's the big spender over at iSolutions, right? And I don't have to write any of the logic around figuring out who's the biggest spender, because the language model will do that. Once it goes and gets the data, it finds every purchase from everybody at an iSolutions email address, looks at their total purchases, sums it up, and then finds who that person is and just tells you it's so-and-so. And then, but here's where it gets even more interesting, is that you can say in that chat, you can say, send Chris a thank you note.
Yeah,
and then you could say, oh, it's asking me to send Chris a thank you note. I know about thank you notes because the API that's been given to me has an endpoint for thank you notes, and it needs an email, and it needs a block of text. And here's the thing: the language model is going to write that thank you note for Chris, right? Yep. And it may show it to me first as, how's this? And I can say, oh, that's great.
Well, it's going to be personalized because it knows me. You can tell it in the style of Todd or whoever their rep is. So it's not just some like boilerplate thing, just so people are truly impressed with what you just said.
Yeah, and maybe I see it in the UI and it says, do you want me to send it? I click OK, and it sends the freaking email. And so all of that stuff, all the complexity around the UI part of it, and even not just the UI, but how it's presented.
The logic.
Do I want to see who bought the most, who bought the least? Do I want that output in a table, or do I want it in JSON? Right? Like you can tell it to do different things with that output, and it will do it. And then you can tell it to go do things. And again, the part that we haven't maybe connected the dots on here is that at the end of the day, when I say do something or query, all I mean is call an API. Guess what database has a built-in API? In fact, it's got 3 or 4 of them if you count them all. You know, FileMaker's got the XML API, the REST API, the OData API, and then the ODBC data API. Yeah. All of those.
Admin API and the admin API?
Yeah, the admin API.
I mean,
so we're thinking about this one too, because you can imagine a day where you just say something like, hey, download me a backup of the contacts file on my server. And it just says, okay. And it sends you a link and it starts downloading a backup of it. Because again, it's using the language model to figure out what commands to call. And this seems like, oh my God, this seems like magic, but it's actually not, because it's actually quite simple in terms of
it's logic.
What you basically have to do is you have to describe in the ChatGPT plugin paradigm. Each one of these is slightly different, but in that one, you describe your API in a well-defined, well-understood spec called OpenAI, not OpenAPI, OpenAI. So you describe that, and now ChatGPT knows that API. It just knows it, and then you also give it basically a big prompt, which kind of describes what this thing can do. And based on those 2 things alone, you can integrate ChatGPT with any file.
Yeah, you're giving it a router.
Yes.
Like this weekend, literally I am writing, so in the ChatGPT plugin world, they call it's just a manifest. It's like a document that they're looking for. And they use that in other places too. And so in this manifest, it says a bunch of things like, when somebody sees this plugin, what's the icon that they're going to see? What's the name of the plugin? And then it goes, and it's really clever. It goes for humans, right? And then it goes for model. And so the thing that I'm writing this weekend and that I'll probably spend the next few weeks doing until we go to production with this thing is I'm saying exactly what you said. I'm taking the entire data dictionary, like to kind of frame up what the magic is. I can tell you, like over Christmas, I took my entire JSON, like the entire output of my whole fantasy football machine learning model, and I crammed it into ChatGPT. Like I pasted it into a conversation into GPT. Thank God it fit, because I had like my big fantasy semifinals, like the next day, and I was like, "What? Tell me what to do." But I realized something interesting. I think that might help people understand this. When I just copied and pasted a spreadsheet, the column headers were just a bunch of weird names, like player dot whatever. And then ChatGPT is like, I guess this is what you're asking for. And then I had like this fever dream, and I go, oh, let me actually change the column headers on the spreadsheet, because that's what it's using as its data dictionary. And this is a crazy experiment. I go, let me actually write a sentence about what this column is, why it's useful and why it's meaningful. And then now fast forward to now, that's literally what I'm doing in this manifest is I'm creating a data dictionary, and I'm saying in plain English, not code, not, Python or something. I'm saying, hey, when these two things are equal, this thing's the tiebreaker. And oh, by the way, none of this matters if this person's like injured and they're not even playing or whatever. So I'm literally going like, hey, ChatGPT, here's how to find value in my specific data so that way and then also when you hear a question for this, go here, question for that, go here, route all this information. And exactly what you just said, it's doing the traffic management and the routing, and it does sound magical, and it is kind of, because the level of, the level it's doing it at is pretty amazing. But if you just do one individual thing, it's pretty obvious. It's like if somebody says something about a player or a customer, go over here. Yeah. That's where all that information is, right? I would dare say.
So how soon until your ChatGPT plugin can go, okay, tomorrow's a big day, NFL football. Who should I start? And then you say, okay, gets the list back. You tweak. Okay, I agree with this. Okay, make this my starting lineup, and it goes and.
Yeah, well, so that is already happening. But here's where, and I think this is a great anecdote to answer your question. This is actually what it did. So in testing, I said, hey, who should I, it's week whatever, and, whatever. Sorry about sports stuff, all the listeners, but like, it's week 14 and the fantasy playoffs are starting. Like, this is when all the money's, or not money, all the bragging rights are on the line. Who should I start, to your point? And it goes and it queries and it figures that out based on the logic and the routing that I gave it. But check this out, dude. The level of reasoning that language models have. This is what I want to leave everybody with. I just did an article, by the way. If anyone finds me on LinkedIn, I just did one as of the recording of this where I was talking about language models as a reasoning engine. Please go check it out. I'm not going to waste everybody's time here, but this is kind of what I'm anchoring on. I then go, so in this same conversation, and again, it's a conversation, so you can drill up and down into the questions that you're asking. And I say, hey, this one player, what's his outlook for the next few weeks? And then it goes, oh, yeah, okay, he should be okay. And then I go, well, how does his matchup strength correlate with the number of touches that he gets in this offensive system? And then it goes, oh, and then Todd, this is what I mean with the reasoning engine. It goes, yeah, that's a good correlation, but there's actually a correlation between this piece of data and this piece of data. And are you interested in that? And I'm like, what? And then I go, what is this that you're talking about? It goes, oh, let's call it a favorability score. And I go, what are you talking about? And then it starts presenting charts to me and graphs. And then I go, oh my God, I didn't even think about that before. It's the same data. I mean, I created the data. I should know this, but it has a level of reasoning and processing that I don't have. And then all of a sudden, by the end of it, I'm literally having it write like a 2-page article for me on all the other players that have the same advantage. You know what I mean? Like, it goes way beyond question answer. Yeah. It is a superpower with logic and reasoning well beyond our comprehension that already exists. Even in these open source models, they have the capability of doing that. And that is how I think people should start to strategize and plan for how they're going to implement foundation/language models into their businesses as differentiators and how to do more with less. Yeah. how to not have to hire more people but still grow, like all the things that everybody cares about who's running a business. Forget it writes a poem or writes an email or something, adorable poems, cute. But the logic, and how does it know logic? Well, how do we know logic, Todd? Who discovered logic? What human being discovered logic? Aristotle. And how did he do it? He literally sat and listened to people talk. And then he came up with syllogisms. He's like, if it rains, the ground is wet. I am the ground, therefore I am wet, or some kind of silly stuff like that. Like, he just sat there in his minimal data set as a human and processed that and goes, oh, that's what logic is. Like, literally, that's where logic came from. Then Boole came and layered a whole nother stack on top of it. Well, that was us humans just listening to people talk that discovered logic. Well, guess what? The language models have been listening to us to talk on the internet for the last 45 years to the level that, like, Lilo did in The Fifth Element and just processes it really fast and goes, oh, I figured out logic too. It's not like reading articles about what logic is. It just figured it out in the same way that we did. So now that level of reasoning and complexity is a tool that we can access from an API. Yes, please. I'll take 10.
Yeah, I think maybe the way to wrap it up is to I mean, we hear a lot of talk about personal agents or business agents, and that's, I think, a good way to think about it. We should, I mean, we've been very enthusiastic about it, and I think we should be, but we should also, again, it's sort of this thing where experts are still needed to know whether these things are doing the right thing and can step in and correct them and do that kind of stuff.
Correct.
It's not like it's more like you have I think about it as an intern or maybe a summer intern or an assistant that you can give tasks to, and it can do things, and then you probably need to validate and check over that stuff at least regularly, if not all the time.
Well put.
And that's
really
but that is what's available today. Is you have somebody who with given the right prompting, the right connections to the right APIs, can work with you to produce outcomes, whether it's code or whether it's insights about data or fantasy football, or do things like place an order at some restaurant or some store based on their API. This stuff is happening, and again, to bring it back to our home here in FileMaker, what's really needed here is just an API. You just have to have an API, and FileMaker's got one, and there's nothing precluding you from using FileMaker's data APIs to connect to these engines and build these kinds of reasoning, not just reasoning, but things that can actually act in the world.
Absolutely.
As long as
Actions.
there's an API that can do it, you can get it to do it for you.
If you understand that a Claris Connect flow can do a bunch of things, that's what we're talking about, basically, right? But with a level of intelligence where no one has to create the flow. Like, it just imagine like, well, and I actually did this experiment. I loaded all the Claris Connect connector names and descriptions into context window, and then I started asking it problems and going, only use these connectors as they're defined with dependencies in mind to solve the problem I just gave to you. I was like, how do I know in my inventory levels, how do I order new inventory or something before I run out in order to meet my orders or something, whatever it was, dude. Yeah, it does. And by the way, that Zapier, sorry, Claris, but Zapier does that. They have this natural language actions thing that if anybody's using Zapier out there, you should check it out as sort of an example of that. But yeah, Todd, really well put. I think that's a great point for us to anchor on. The only thing I'm going to offer is I just want to drop a couple like predictions for the future as it pertains to language models. How's that? Yeah. Only because I had so much fun with that 2 years ago and like a bunch of them came true. So everything Todd said, do that today. But if you want to, throw some grass up into the wind and see where it lands and pontificate over the future. First of all, who knows, in 2 weeks from now, Apple could have just completely upset the apple cart, so to speak, and everything changes. But yet to come, GPT-4, awesome. Yeah. Probably overkill for most tasks that we're talking, almost all the tasks we're talking about, it's overkill. But what we still haven't gotten the API to is image inputs. Yeah. Like that, the whole thing, if people didn't see it, some guy sketched what a web page was going to look like, took a picture of it on his phone, uploaded it to GPT-4, and it wrote all of the HTML and JavaScript for the website, and it worked in an execution environment. Imagine the impact of that. Open source language models. We touched on it already. They're here to stay. They will be ubiquitous, and they will be 3/4 or more of all language model deployments within businesses. And then infinite context windows. We talked about it before, 32K, 100K with Anthropic. We'll be laughing about the fact that there's no, that, that we
you
won't
got to
have this
remember
anymore.
that when I started with computers, we had floppy disks with 2K on them, right?
The kids love this. Like that's where the whole 64K is all enough. Like you could say the same thing.
Disc,
Oh,
right? You know, they were even smaller.
8K,
Tape originally, like it was just awful.
Seriously. That just so everybody knows, that's how long Todd and I have known each other, back when we had floppy. Maybe like what were those?
They were the hardware, the 3.5
yeah,
inch discs.
The zip drive
zip drives,
or whatever. Yeah. That was maybe a couple of years into when we knew each other. But infinite context windows will be like us talking about zip drives. And I hope we don't have to wait for probably a few years from now, like SSMs or state space models they won't even have a context window. But hopefully they'll figure that out in the meantime. And then we talked about the dialogue models as well too, and like the Twitter thing we were talking about. I think when we do our next pod, those are going to be things that everyone's already talking about.
I think we've talked a lot about some theory and some you've done a lot more actual work in this area than I have, but we're just beginning and it's looking very interesting. And I expect that in the next year, when we do this again in a year or so, we will have a lot of actual real world stuff.
Let's put it this way, Todd.
Frankly.
By Engage in February, I believe my expectation is people will show up and show what they've been doing with it. It will surprise people. People will be able to embrace it. So the decision for us to wrap up here today is probably, if you're listening to this, if you're a developer, what's your decision? If you're a business decision maker, what's your decision? The developers are, at least embrace your curiosity. Like if you put your head in the sand on JavaScript, and you did the same thing with AI, and I mean this with respect, but you can't do that anymore. Like, at least whip open the free ChatGPT and don't ask it, like, write a FileMaker script for it. Just do other things. Just get familiar with what the capabilities of this are. You absolutely have to do that, because there's not enough room on the arc for everybody. They're only admitting people who have taken time to look into this. So be one of those people. That's what you do on a development side. And then embrace it. Lean into, like, go do some API calls. Go get yourself an API key. It's publicly available. It has been for like a year and a half, 3 years. You could go get an API key, and it cost, all the stuff we're doing, I haven't had a OpenAI bill, Todd, for more than like $300 in a month. So that's what we're talking about. Go crazy with it and check it out. Have fun with it. It's awesome, and you're going to have so much cool stuff. Business decision makers, don't focus on generative AI. As a matter of fact, I didn't use that term once here because I don't believe in it. These language models' capabilities go way beyond generating text and poems and copy and blogs. Do all that, have at it. But when you're making decisions about what you're going to do, to Todd's point, between now and like a year from now, forget all that. If that's what the decisions you're making, forget it. Do the language model and the reasoning. Talk about how your data in the paradigm we just discussed can actually be infused between your users and your organizational, your latent intelligence that exists within your organization. You can expose that to language models, and holy cow.
Yep.
That's what you should be thinking about. So that's what I think in those two groups of people, if our advice matters, we're just a couple old floppy disk dudes. But if our advice matters, I think that's where people should go with this from here.
Yep, I agree. It's good stuff. Well, I think we've said a lot, and we've been at it for a little over an hour, so this is probably a good
This
time.
is what our phone conversations are like, Todd. like just so people know, like this is the third time this week Todd and I have had
on a Saturday afternoon.
An hour and a half conversation. Yeah.
So
really enjoyed it, man.
Yeah.
Thank you for this opportunity. I appreciate you continuing to, reach out and have these conversations. Your friendship means a lot to me. Your professional support and the alignment on these issues to me means a lot. So I really look forward to this, and it was a lot of fun. And I hope people who stuck around for an hour and 18 minutes got a lot of good out of it. So I much appreciate it.
Same to you. It's been a great 25 years.
Stop saying
Let's look for
that.
another 25.
All right, I'm down. Maybe make it 15.
All right. All right, Chris. Thanks very much.
All right, buddy.
See you again soon.
Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Cheers.
Just as a reminder, this is available on YouTube and as a podcast, and make sure you check out the show notes as there are a lot of links to share there. If you can take a minute to pause and subscribe, we'd really appreciate it, but better yet, if you can share it with a friend, that would be pretty awesome. No matter what your role is in this community, you're proof of how amazing this Claris community really is. My job is to help spread your knowledge and your stories on the podcast. Find me on Twitter at MZ123 or at Proofgeist, and let's share your story.